very excited because they're all here for a start, which is good news. Shall we start with Roz, because you're next to me at the top?
Hi, I'm Roz Watkins, and I'm the author of the D.I. Meg Dalton series, which is set in the Peak District. This is the first one, The Devil's Dice, and then Dead Man's Daughter, and the one that came out just recently, Cut to the Bone. So they're basically crime, but there's always a hint of something a little bit creepy, stroke supernatural. My detective is always convinced it's not supernatural and has to work out what's going on. So yeah, that's basically the supernatural theme in them.
Matt, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm Matt Hilton. Welcome to Celebrity Squares. No, seriously, I'm best known as a thriller writer, but I also do write supernatural crime as well. Probably the one that would be most applicable to UK crime book readers would be Dark, which features D.I. Kerry Dark. She's a detective inspector in London. As a small child, she witnessed the abduction of her older sister, and it's kind of affected her all of her life. She was taken by a serial killer known as the Fell Man, and never been found. So there's a, you know, like Roz just said, I like to play with the fact that is it or isn't it supernatural. She starts seeing ghosts, for want of a better term, and I'll leave it up to the reader as to whether to judge whether it's all a figment of her imagination or whether it is actual supernatural. I also wanted to mention The Shadows Call as well, which is a ghost story, but it's also involves a crime. I write another series called Preternatural. The book one in the series was written quite a few years ago. I haven't got back to it yet. And several standalones as well. I've written various more horror, you would call them, which might not appeal really to the readers here, but you know, it's all part of the genre to me. So yeah, supernatural crime, here we go.
Jim?
Hi, so I'm Jim Odie. I've released 11 books now, one tomorrow, in fact, which I'll just get so that's that one. So basically, the majority of mine are kind of psychological thrillers, but they, just like Roz, really, there's always something a little bit strange going on, and you're never quite sure whether it's supernatural, whether it's just something that's a bit of a legend, or just kind of play on whether things could happen, couldn't happen, kind of those types of tales, old folk kind of things. Most of mine are standalone, but I do have similar characters who pop up in a lot of the books. They tend to be set around a fictional town called Thornhill in Wiltshire. But recently, so I've just started a series. So this is the first one, which is called A Lifetime Ago. So they're about there's a guy called Hudson Bell who used to be a detective, but something happened which kind of stopped him from being a policeman anymore. So along with his sidekick Jez, they go looking for pretty much cold crimes and missing people, really, that the police have had a go at, and then they've come to a standstill. So now they look to Hudson and Jez to kind of take up on these and go and try and find people. So yeah, like I say, A Lifetime Ago was released in March, which seems to have done really well. Seem to have a lot of good reviews from that, which is brilliant. And then Come Back Home, which is book 2, comes out tomorrow. And again, that seems to be going very well. So that's it.
So before we go on to any other questions from the people watching, shall we start off with what drew you to sort of having little elements of supernatural or maybe even not in your books? Should we just add that those are Matt's dogs?
Shall I go?
Yeah, let's start off with you, Roz. Yeah.
Yes, hi dog. I think it's for me because I'm always really fascinated with these. Is it true? Is it sort of within science, or is it supernatural sort of questions? So I tend to read quite a lot about that kind of thing. So, for instance, my second book, Dead Man's Daughter, I had the idea when I was reading about people who had heart transplants, and then they felt their personalities had changed after heart transplants. And I just thought that's really intriguing. And I even read this really creepy story about this little 5-year-old girl who had a heart transplant, and then she ended up meeting the parents of the donor, and she ran up to them and said, "Mummy, Daddy," and everyone was like, "Oh, that's really just like not right." And I read some sort of personal accounts of where this had happened, and I just thought, this is so fascinating. And is there a scientific way this could happen? And I was reading about things like you can have parasites that infect you and change the way you think, and so there are mechanisms by which this could happen. And I was just really intrigued by that. And obviously I also started thinking about some of the darker things that could happen if somebody was murdered and then their heart was donated. Could the donor have some memories of that? And so it's things like that really where I just find something that fascinates me and then make it into a story. And then my detective kind of is very skeptical, and she has to work out whether the weird stuff is really happening or if there's a sort of a scientific explanation for it. If that makes sense.
It does, yeah. Matt?
I've got two reasons, I suppose. When I was a kid, I grew up on ghost stories. My father used to tell us ghost stories all the time to frighten the life out of us. So I grew up listening to, they were kind of ad hoc stories sometimes, but a lot of the time based on legend and folklore and things, So I grew up being terrified of the dark. So I got a healthy kind of fear, and I think it opened my mind to other possibilities. Now, also, I read, before I was a crime writer, I suppose I'd be more inclined to read horror or fantasy. And I grew up on stories from the 1930s, like H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, also Edgar Allan Poe. So I came into crime writing having read kind of them early mysteries. So it always had a little bit of an effect on my writing anyway. Always like that darkness. As I've grown older, and this is where I sound like a bit of a strange dude, but I've experienced several things in my life that's actually left me, thinking what was just going on there. So it's given me an interest in all things supernatural. Don't necessarily believe everything, but give me the Loch Ness Monster or a UFO or anything, ghosts, spirits, whatever like that, and I'm fascinated by the subject as to what it is and as to whether that's is it something that we're going to find out in the future through science, or is it always going to be to us? So I'm just fascinated by the subject, so it obviously leaks into my writing.
Sorry, Matt, can everybody else hear Matt?
I could, but I've just lost them.
Oh no, you're back now, Matt.
Apologies.
We lost you.
I had similar before with some when Jim was speaking as well. I lost some of the dialogue. I was just saying that sorry if I'm repeating myself again. I've a real fascination with everything mysterious, whether that's crime, whether it's ghosts, whether it's you name it, and it grabs me, and I love to into it. Something that fascinates me. I'm one of these people who goes out on a night time and I'm just able to look up at the sky and feel totally, insignificant at the wonder of the universe that I don't understand. So anything that's mysterious grips me, and it leaks into my writing in that form. So, and I mentioned earlier about my early writing and stuff. It was based very much on, like Edgar Allan Poe and Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft. So I came into crime writing via the horror and fantasy route.
There's some great questions coming in on the screen. Jim, what about you?
Yes, I'm similar to both Roz and Matt, really. Just like Matt, I grew up really on horror stories. Big Richard Lehman fan, obviously King, Kuntz, that sort of thing. So I originally was going to write horror. But when I came to start writing really seriously, which was the end of the kind of 90s, horror had kind of died a death a little bit, and that was when the likes of Patterson and the such like were suddenly crime was the big thing. Everything was almost recategorized. Anything that was a bit dark and was a killer was then a crime and was no longer horror anymore. So the horror genre kind of cut right down to only being more supernatural and things like that. I guess when I was back at school, many moons ago now, I was always in the corner where they had the supernatural books, and those were the ones that were very much dog-eared after I would take them out time and time again, looking at the ones with the pictures of the people in the background and stuff like that, and just completely fascinated with everything that was in there. And so, yeah, really, just the same. I used to watch Unsolved Mysteries and love that program, just looking at it and always wanting to kind of find an answer to things. And I think I've always had that almost internal struggle between wanting to believe a lot, but having a very almost scientific thought process at thinking there must be a reason to this. So my daily job is as a business analyst. So I have to find answers to things. So naturally, I want to find answers to things. So it could leave you to be skeptical, but I think I'm still quite open-minded to that. And, that's what I try and bring into my books. I like to think, what if, could this happen? If something hasn't been proven it can't happen, then I want to explore that further. So I try and bring that into the books until, we kind of know otherwise, because there's still a whole lot out there that we don't know. I'm still fascinated by everything from, unsolved murders that we see now to, your legends of your Loch Ness monsters and your Honourable Snowman and so forth. I think all of us have that same thing, which we can bring into the crime genre and give it a little twist on the end to just really make our books slightly different from others that are out there. And, I think that's where, certainly the three of us have a very similar, I think, view on how we write.
Yeah.
There's some great questions. Sorry, Matt.
No, I was just going to say I agree with Jim. A few years ago, when I was an aspiring author, I've been kind of pro now for 12 years. But before that, when you used to go to the Writers and Artists Yearbook to look for agents and things like that, there was always a rider at the end saying no horror, no sci-fi, no fantasy, and it was like. And yet, they're some of the most popular books in the history of literature, and yet there seemed to be a snobbishness towards it. And yeah, the horror genre, unless you were called Stephen King or Dean Koontz, you didn't get published for a long time. So I think a lot of horror writers end up writing crime in a darker end of crime for want of writing darker stuff. Sorry, that wasn't very erudite, but yeah, I think you get what I mean.
Very good. I'm going to go to some of the questions on the stream. Steve Munoz, one of our American members, before we do that, says he likes how Jim put the idea of the struggle between science and the unknown. My dad's watching, so hi, Dad. He's the founder of the group, and it's his birthday tomorrow, so happy birthday in advance. And we've got a question from TG, who's one of our author members. She writes as TK Gearing. She says she's a psychic. So she's curious as if you ever approach psychics for help with stories or plots, etc. So shall we start with Roz?
No, I never have for help with a plot. I have in the past spoken to a couple and very different experiences. So I went in there for the first one. I went in there very much like, I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm going to see if they can find anything out about me. And I wasn't very impressed. And it was very much like they just told me all the kind of usual stuff. And all my friends were like, oh, it's amazing. She came out with all this. I was thinking, because I watched a lot of Derren Brown, and he managed to convince people that he was psychic just by kind of cold reading and stuff. But the second one that I went to see, I went in with the same attitude, and she came out with some stuff that was really quite weird. And so I can't actually remember any specifics now, but she sort of seemed to know a lot of things about me that, you know, that I didn't see how she could possibly have known. So I'm very much in the camp of there will be a scientific explanation for this, but I don't know what it is at the moment. I mean, I just think that today's supernatural is tomorrow's science. And we're always finding out more and more stuff, especially about the way that our brains work and the mind-body connection and everything. But, you know, and dogs can practically read your mind, can't they, by using other senses. So maybe there's something like that going on. So I haven't actually experienced someone doing anything as weird as telling the future, but certainly knowing stuff that they shouldn't know, I've been quite intrigued by, and I probably will include that in a book in the future as well. But I might try and work out a scientific explanation for why they know the stuff they know.
Good answer, Matt.
I've actually conducted and been part of several paranormal investigations, and I was bringing the kind of scientific, level-headed approach, being an ex-cop. And I worked with wouldn't call Mike a psychic, but it was an empath. And I was very skeptical, to be honest. But the more I worked with Mike, the more I realized that, you know, there is something here. What it is, like Ros says, I don't know what the answer is yet, but I got a healthy respect for his abilities as well, even to a point where he actually told me I had a medical issue that I hadn't shared with anybody else, and it wasn't obvious, and it was just random and out of the blue. Throughout my life, I've experienced real vivid deja vu, you'd call them, or precognitive experiences. And also I had an epiphany about 20 years ago where my little sister, sorry if this is a bit saddy, but she actually predicted her own death in drawings. And it just blew my mind. So I believe that there is a greater power. I just don't know what it is yet. So I'm not open. I'm not close to the idea of psychics whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah. Jim, how do you follow that?
To be honest, I've never really had any experience at all. So I've never approached one, and I've never had one approach me. So the short and sweet answer really is, you know, although I'm open to you know, anything really, I've just never had that experience. So, you know, here's to the future.
One of our admins, Sam Brownlee, who's fab, she's one of the other author chat team, she says, did you find yourself creeped out during any research or writing any particular scenes? Now, there are some really creepy scenes in all of your books. So I'm interested in this answer. Let's start with Ros again.
I think one of the creepiest things was when I was writing about the drowned villages, actually, under Ladybower Reservoir in Derbyshire, because I thought the whole idea of these villages being drowned under the reservoir was creepy in the first place. And then I also I tend to make up folk tales. We have some really good folk tales in Derbyshire, but they're sort of not quite right usually for my story. So I make my own up. And I made up this story about this girl who'd been murdered as a child, and her ghost lived in the old manor house that was that sort of was in one of these villages. And she was quite benign, but once the village was drowned, she kind of got a bit more needy, and she was desperate for someone after her. So basically she would wander around and look for people to look after her. And if you let her see your face, then she would sort of claim you to look after her. But obviously to look after her, you had to be dead as well. So anyone who saw this girl's face would end up dying. And I was up in that area doing research and walking in the woods up there, and I could have sworn I saw this girl that I'd created sort of just through the trees. And obviously I know it's not her, or it's just my brain, but it really made the hairs on the back of my neck rise up. So, oh my God, if I now die, I've like proved my own story. So keep your fingers crossed for me. It wasn't long ago.
That's actually there's a thing called an egregor in supernatural myth where the power of thought and intention can actually make a ghost manifest. So yeah, brilliant.
Oh God, yeah, I manifested my own ghost. And of course you can kill yourself, can't you, by believing that you're going to die.
Yeah. Fear and it's crazy. I'll jump in. I haven't been creeped out in any kind of research or anything, but I've been creeped out several times in life, mostly by people or rather than by anything supernatural. One time I was investigating a haunted house, put it that way, and I had one of those moments where I almost died on the spot because I looked down and there was something that looked in all appearance like a deformed baby crawling across the floor towards me. Now, whether it was just a conjure in my mind because of the moment or it was a snapshot, I saw it, but I jumped about 10 feet in the air and let a squeal out of it like Scooby-Doo, you know. I've experienced a few creepy things. Not well done research.
Jim?
God.
I wouldn't say necessarily too much with research. I'm not massive one for research, mainly because I've looked into a lot of stuff in the past. So I often pull my experience of what I've previously read by not looking at too much detail. So almost from my memory and conjuring that up into a story. I guess sometimes in scenes, I'll be slightly creeped out because as a writer, you're putting everything in that you feel. So if I want to write a scary scene, I'm writing things that scare me and things that I find eerie. Just like when I add comedy in, you know, I'm not ashamed to say if I read it back later, I'll be laughing to myself. And, you know, it's because that's what makes me laugh, you know, and other things like that. It's really part of you that you're putting into the story. So, yeah, it's the same with the scenes, really. You know, everything that you find, you know, which really gets your heckles up or really makes you, you know, have that cold chill is what you put in, and you hope that other people almost can absorb and, you know, immerse themselves within the story to actually feel exactly that.
There's a really good question that's come in from a new member. I'm going to read you the whole thing out because it's quite long, but I think we touched on it earlier. He says he loves the supernatural and crime novels. John Connolly introduced it successfully in his mainstream Charlie Parker series, but he still senses resistance from some crime readers who like their genres strictly defined. He has a theory that it goes back to the Hound of the Baskervilles. Prior to this, crime horror mingled much more easily. Have you guys ever encountered this resistance?
Yeah.
I haven't, no. But maybe because mine so far have always had a rational explanation. I know writers though who've put something that's not rational in, and I'm not aware that they've had resistance. But mine they've always been logical in the end, I guess. So maybe that's why I haven't had the resistance. But you guys obviously have.
Yeah. First books I wrote were more leaning toward the supernatural and the horror genre, and couldn't get anybody interested in them until I switched to straight crime. And I argued the fact that, you know, John Connolly is one of my favourite writers, fabulous. I was saying it's out now, supernatural, but they call it crime, you know. And I said, well, you know, so's mine, but they wouldn't entertain it anyway. So yeah, there is a resistance. And I think because John writes such a damn good story, and he you know, it's equally heavy on crime fiction or the PI genre really, as the supernatural is involved, that he got through, you know, and he's managed to break into the mainstream. Several other writers have, you know, like James Oswald, people like that have hints of supernatural in their books and got in, but they're not known as horror writers or supernatural writers. They're still crime writers. Stephen Leather as well. There's a series with Jack Nightingale. But again, Stevenson, because he's a thriller writer, you know, so he got that avenue. He was already a bestseller and things like that. So I think it's if they can market you and sell a load of books on your back, then they'll publish the book. But you know, if you're new and trying to break in, they keep telling me things like they don't know where to market at. You know, it's like I've written, you know, like supernatural crime to thriller. Well, market as crime. It's predominantly crime with a hint of supernatural. So, but couldn't get a traditional publisher, even with about 15 books behind me. I couldn't get a traditional publisher for that. So I went the indie publishing route with that one. So there's still a problem there. I don't get it.
Is it because it's, because I'm thinking, like, if you call it gothic nowadays, you seem to be able to get away with anything, don't you? But is that because it's not crime as such? Is it just within crime that there's this prejudice?
Could be. Yeah. I mean, certainly for me,
I really don't know. You just said if you call it. Sorry, Jim.
No, that's fine. No, carry on.
I was just saying it probably is if they rebrand it and if they call it gothic now, you know, instead of horror, people will buy it. Same as, you know, probably you ought to call it crime fiction noir instead of crime fiction, you know, to introduce like a grittier edge to the crime fiction field, you know. So I think it's just about trying to get things on shelves so that people know exactly where they're going to. So I often.
Do you think, Matt's frozen a little bit, do you think that, because there is an appetite for things like urban fantasy, which is sort of more into the horror, supernatural things, like I'm thinking things like the Dresden Files, Rivers of London are really popular, and they have that supernatural element. Do you think it's where you keep a very large element of crime, maybe, that the prejudice comes in?
Yeah, I wonder if it's because people want to solve the puzzle, you know, back to your sort of Agatha Christie type crime where it's very much about the intellectual puzzle. So if you then have a supernatural element, it almost feels like you're cheating and you're not giving the reader that puzzle. So I sort of get that if you just whip the supernatural out and that's your way of solving everything. But if it's threaded in the whole way through and there are clear rules, then I don't really see the problem. But I guess I can see why, you know, there used to be those rules of crime, didn't there, with certain things, and one of them was that there always had to be a rational explanation. But I guess surely we're moving on from that now.
Yeah.
No, I think it's hard sometimes because there does seem to be these very strict kind of rules and regulations of what should and shouldn't be within kind of certainly mainstream crime, I guess. I myself have found my second book, The Place That Never Existed, that Kaz will know all about. The twist in the end is something completely different. And whilst throughout the book, I will add kind of these little Easter eggs to hint, people still found the ending to be completely unexpected, and it's a very Marmite book. People either really love it, or a lot of the poor reviews will say, I loved it right up until the end. And that's because it didn't conform with their, you know, understanding of normal kind of mainstream books, I guess. But then, you know, the same with you, I suspect. We don't want to write those sort of book by numbers. That's not what you want to do. You want to do something different. And unfortunately, the marketing for those is such that people don't want to take a chance on that because they're too worried there isn't a market. When we know there is a market, it's tapping into that and, you know, being allowed to kind of blossom as we are in our strange little ways.
Yeah, because there's constant pressure to have a more amazing twist all the time, isn't there? But then there's obviously rules about what this twist is allowed to be. But then certain books have got away with it massively. Like, I mean, Sarah Pinborough's book, What the Fuck, That Ending? Yeah, I mean, it was amazing, but it also was exactly what you've just said. And I guess some people probably didn't like it, but generally it seemed to do really well. So maybe whether that's opened it up for the rest of us a bit more.
But I do think
back.
The internet dropped out there for some reason. I do apologise.
I do think it's about persevering in what we write and what we enjoy writing, because it's very easy to get caught up in trying to write for readers, and we know that's not the right thing to do. You have to write for yourself, and band together with other people that write similarly, and hopefully then other readers find you that way, and it kind of puts you out there a little bit more. And the people that are looking, because there'll be a number of people looking for these types of books but can't find them anywhere, and they don't understand, and if it's not marketed right, they won't find them, and if the covers aren't right, and if the blurb isn't right, and if the right publisher isn't there and stuff like that, you have to work very differently and accordingly to try and get these things out there. And it's the endless struggle we have.
Well, as your host and a fan of all of you, please keep writing. Because you're all amazing. And I need to read all of your books. Even if no one else is. Steve Munoz asks, are there any writers that you follow and your favourite books to read? I call these like shut up and take my money books. The people who you don't need to read the blurb of. So, for instance, like I read everything that Jim's written. I would read all of your books, Ros, without reading the back. The same with Matt. What are your kind of shut up and take my money books?
Oh, let someone else go first. Let me have a think about.
Well, we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with him.
There's a number for me. So Joe R. Lansdale. I will read anything he writes. Again, he's very good at doing dark crime set in Texas, and he has a very good sense of humour, and I love the merge of those two together, and that's what really helped me write dark crime with a comedy aspect, along the lines of people like Stephen King, who can obviously do that very well. I like Bentley Little and Dean Koontz. Who else? I mean, it's just so many, and so many indie authors that I can't, if I sat here and tried to say them, I'd be here forever. People like Mel Comley, who I'm slowly getting all her books, but she keeps releasing them quicker than I can read them, so it's very hard. And Emmy Ellis, and there's just so many within the group. But I think this is the problem we're all probably finding as well. There are so many brilliant writers out there, and we're all the same. We're readers as well as writers, and it's a huge misconception, and something that I came up with an American publisher. In America, everyone seemed to be more against each other, but that's not how it is. Certainly not over here at all. We're all one big group. We all support each other. We're readers first. We're writers as well. I want all of my author friends to be writing brilliant books that I can enjoy whilst I'm writing mine. So, there's just so many for me, unfortunately.
Matt?
John Connolly was mentioned earlier. Is probably one of my top, authors. It's like you say, I just get the book whether what's on the blurb or not. I just pick it up and I buy it, and I've followed John for many years now. People like Adam Neville. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them. They're more horror, but he's written some of the creepiest books I've read, to be honest. I think for the atmosphere and whatnot. If I could attain a book, on a level with Adam Neville's books, I'd be very happy indeed. You mentioned, Jim, some of the indie authors. I follow a lot of indie authors as well, or I've come to know a lot of them over the years. And, people like Paul D. Brazil probably should get a nod if anyone read Paul. He writes terrific noir crime, he writes terrific comedy crime, he writes brilliant blend between horror and crime fiction as well. There's another author I'd like to give a nod to called Lily Childs, and again, what a fabulous writer she is, almost poetic, the way that she writes her horror. and guaranteed to give your stomach a twist as well. So they're people that I've been reading over the years. Dean Koontz, though, is probably one of my go-to guys as well. And again, I'd like to say that Dean Koontz is one of these guys who can write a straight thriller, or he can write a horror, or he can write a crime fiction, but he always gets lumped in the horror category. So a lot of the crime fiction readers probably miss some of his great thrillers, likes of Intensity and Dark Rivers of the Heart, things like that. I once had a reader get in touch with me and say, apart from Dean Koontz, I was the only other person that had used the word susurration in my writing. So I was chuffed to bits because I probably picked it up from reading Dean Koontz. So there we go. So we're happy about that.
Roz?
Yeah, Dean Koontz has got some really interesting different books, hasn't he? Because the first one I read by him I wasn't that keen on, and then I read a few others and it's like such fascinating ideas. So he's on my list as well. There's another Derbyshire writer, Sophie Draper, who she writes psychological thrillers, but they tend to have a sort of gothic stroke creepy supernatural edge to them. So she's worth checking out. I do like a bit of Gillian Flynn. I know she's not on the supernatural side, but she's definitely one of those authors where I will read everything she writes. And I mean, Laura Purcell as well, sort of on the gothic side of things. I like hers too. And then just, I guess it's just, you know, you tend to get sent a lot of proofs, don't you? So I'm reading a lot of newer authors at the moment, and not so much the old favourites. But there's one just here that's out on Thursday by Kia Abdullah, Truth Be Told, which is fabulous, and it's not supernatural, so it's probably not relevant to this panel, but it happened to be on the table in front of me. So I definitely recommend that to everyone.
She was on a panel last night though with us.
Was she? Oh, that's good timing then. So I just thought that book was fabulous, and the last one as well.
So there's a question on the stream, and I'm gonna get to
just
it.
For the sake of
Go on, Matt.
I was just going to say a couple of authors I maybe should have given a nod to, because it sounded like I was being very misogynistic there. I've fallen in love with C.J. Tudor's books. At first I read The Chalkman, and it was like, do I like this or don't I like it? But I followed her writing right through The Taking of Annie Thorne and the other people. Now I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
So I think a writer can grow on you sometimes. I like it that she's kind of reinventing some, you know, some of it's a little bit close to some of Stephen King's plot lines, but hey, it's just reinvention. And also GX Todd, who writes a series. It's more an apocalyptic series, but it has a supernatural bent to it as well. So they're two ladies that I'm enjoying their books at the moment. Sorry for jumping into that.
It's fine. It's just we've got a question about the process when it comes to your writing. So I think this comes into the plotter pantsing as well. And I've noticed, and we talked about this when we did the promo with Roz, that there's all these amazing stick-it notes behind it that I think are showing some of her process. So you can tell us a little bit about your process.
Oh yeah, my process is really awfully sort of like chaotic at the moment. I keep thinking I will find my way. I mean, I'm on book 4 now, and I still haven't got a clue what I'm doing. But yeah, I use these post-it notes. I've got a massive whiteboard, so there's like a family tree on the whiteboard as well. So I've got a sort of garden room, which is brilliant, and I put whiteboards all along one side of it. So the post-its are scenes that I've plotted out, but that's only about a third of the way through the book. So I tend to kind of plot about a third of it and then start writing, and then I do a lot of scribbling in notebooks as well. So just kind of like random notes. I've also started trying to dictate more because I've got a bit of a pain in my arms. I've been randomly dictating notes to myself as well. So it's all very chaotic. But I do try to at least, I don't necessarily try and work out what happens and in what order, but I do try and have a really good think about what happened, what the mystery is, what people's motivations are, and sort of the background to the mystery. And then I almost start writing and let my characters find their way through to the truth in a bit more of an organic way. So I don't know if that makes sense. Oh, and I sometimes use these as well. Like, as you can see, I'm desperately trying to find a way. I've also experimented with Scrivener, but I haven't quite got the hang of that yet. So various desperate attempts to be more organized going on here. You're going to tell me you guys have got like a really wonderful structured process now, aren't you?
Matt?
There's my plotting, beginning, middle, end. So, an envelope, I'm a pantser. I just sit down at the computer and I go for it, and I try to keep everything in order up here. I'm not saying it's the right way, it's just my way. So I just start at the beginning and see where the plot takes me, really. So
Wow.
I've tried plotting, but I find it I end up going off on a tangent, and I find it half the time it's a struggle trying to get it back online. So I just end up following where my story's taken me. So there's right and there's wrong in everything, and I'm probably wrong, because you can get yourself into a real deep hole sometimes, pants, and not be able to dig yourself out of it. So yeah, seeds of the pants stuff. There we go.
Jim?
So for me, if you look at exactly at what Ros has done and then do completely opposite to that, I do nothing like that. I'm just like Matt. I literally start with a tiny nugget of an idea, and I will just sit down and just start writing. I'll have no idea what the middle is going to be like. I'll have no idea what the ending is going to be like. I mean, so I've got 11 books written, 2 more with ideas kind of where I want to go with them. They all have twists, but the twists I don't even think about or even worry about having a twist. I don't set out to have a twist, but a twist will come, and I know a twist will come, and I just let that sit there and grow itself in the back of my mind. And I think because you're not forcing it, then something happens, and thankfully, fingers crossed, it always comes together in the end. So I will just sit there, because it's a couple of months of me writing. What I found, probably a bit like Matt, I tried once to plot. I started writing down, and I just found it long-winded, hard. I didn't find I was getting anywhere at all, and I get bored. Yeah. If I know what's going to happen, I will get bored, because that same story is going to stay with me around my mind for 2-3 months or whatever. If I know what's going to happen, then I've forgotten that book, like I've dismissed it, and I've moved on to the book I'm going to write after that, because that's what is going to get me excited. So I have to almost trick myself into not knowing what's going on in order to keep excited and keep moving on with it. So then I'm, as I'm writing it, I have no idea what's going to happen. And so you'll sit there and you'll go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. And then sometimes, I'll be driving the car and I'll think, oh, that could happen, couldn't it? And then I'll go back. And as Matt said, we know this isn't the best way of doing it, because invariably I get almost to the end, I think of something, I add a character, and I have to go all the way through, and I have to re-entwine them within the story. And I try and start off with a really simple book, and I think, right, no, this one's going to be a simple one this time. I'm not going to get all complex. This is going to be a nice one. And then I start going, I go, oh, but what if this happened? Okay, so I just add that bit in, and then so they're actually to do with that person, so then that has to happen there and there. And what if? And then I just add these other things. So it's just pure intertwining until I get to the end, and I think, all right, that is pretty complex now. I didn't mean to do that, but it seems to work. And every time I try and do a simple story, it doesn't come off that way. And sometimes I've also thought of just doing a novella. 4 books were going to be novellas, and they didn't end up being novellas at all. They ended up being novels, and exactly the same. I thought, right, I'm just going to do a simple story this time, and I thought, it's too simple. I'm not. It doesn't feel right, so I need to add a bit more. And yeah, they just get more and more. So I I will write 3 or 4 chapters, and then I will get rid of 3 and 4 chapters because I think, no, that's going off in the wrong direction. I'm taking that back. I'm swapping chapters around. But like I say, it works for me. And so I would love to be a planner, and I would love to have, when people tell me, yeah, my character, I know everything about them. I've got books and, and lists of everything they enjoy doing, the type of person they are, their personality, and I think that is brilliant. I'd love to do that, and I start doing it, and I think, no, I can't do that. That's not me. So
I can't do that. It sort of seems really dull, doesn't it? Somehow writing down everything about it. I'm a bit of a mixture because mine definitely, the characters definitely come out in the dialogue as I write it. So I can't really plan what the characters are going to be like. And although I do try and plan, I'd still end up doing all the things you've said. I'll write multiple drafts, and I'll add characters, take characters away, try and add more depth to it. And first draft tends to be mainly just dialogue, and then I have to add the setting and sort of subtext and stuff. So it's I can't really work out a more efficient way of doing it at the moment. I don't think I could ever be one of these people who knows it has it all sort of worked out beforehand. I just, there's too much thinking involved. It just takes me too long to think about it.
The other thing I find though is when I finish the book and I've moved on to the next one, I've forgotten the intricacy of the last one. So readers will come to me and they'll go, "Oh, this twist that you did, what was this about?" And I'll go, "Well, hold on, I'm going to have to read through this all again." Or Simon Webb's in my group, and he's brilliant because I ask him, and he tends to know my books better than I do.
I've had that. It's like you're asking me about a book that I wrote like 4 or 5 years ago. I've got absolutely no clue what happens, at all, basically.
Well, I had a book recently that I took back from my publisher and I self-published it, and I read through it, and I hadn't read through it for probably a couple of years, and I got to the end and there was another twist I'd added in there that I'd completely forgotten about. And I thought, oh, that's a good one. Oh, I like that. And it was like reading it for the first time again. It's brilliant.
I can't always remember if he left it in or if he took something, because I take so much stuff out. It's like, did I actually write that in or not? And especially when you're writing a series, you have to try and remember whether someone had a dog or not and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's really complicated.
I was going to ask you about that actually, because some of you do write series. I know Jim's just started, but Matt, you've got quite long running series. How do you, especially if you pants it, how do you remember what all the characters did? Do you have like a Bible of your characters, of like things that they like and look like, or to help you prod your memory when you come back?
In my case, no. I said before, it's all just up here, and I just try and keep in line. I jokingly tell people that in the first book, Joe Hunter series, he had blue eyes, and in the next one he had green. So in the third book, he had greeny blue eyes. Depending on his mood, that kind of thing. So no, I try to keep it all in my head, and then occasionally I'll just dip back into old documents, check up on a fact. I'm writing just before I came on here, and I couldn't remember the name of my character's landlord, so I had to go back to an earlier document. That was it. And on I go again. So I just use little, prompts like that if I need them.
Roz, what do you do?
I've just got name from the second book onwards. I've got a chart of names because I like to make sure that the names the characters all start with different initials anyway. So I've got like an A to Z with the character names all in it, and I decided to just put them in the same document for books going forward. So I do go back and check that I'm not reusing names and reminds me about people. But no, I keep meaning to do what you've said actually, and have like little sort of CVs almost of all the characters, but there always seems to be something more interesting to do than that. So it's never happened, and it just gets worse and worse the more books you write, obviously. So I probably will have to at some point read them again and do that.
What about you, Jim?
No, I just go with it, and it's all up here in theory. Just have to try and find out where it is. I mean, I know recently, because although I've just started a series, but my other books, and including in this book, have characters that are in a lot of them. And so one of the main characters who's in a lot of books is called Jez. And I think after about my third or fourth book, I was going to write about his wife in there, and I couldn't remember whether I'd written her name previously, and it took me ages. And I had to ask one of my readers, who actually came up with that I had just mentioned it briefly once in a text conversation in my first book. And so then I was like, oh, okay, I can use that now. So now I know it because she actually appears in one of the books. So yeah, it's completely edge of the seat and just going for it, really. But I have got a brilliant group of guys who beta readers who do pick up on all my failings. So that's always good. Of which there are many.
It's interesting when you mention about names, because I had a Huff, a Hoff, and a Hoffman all in one book. You know, until I had to, I better change these, because to me they were all right in my head, but I thought the readers are just going to get totally confused there. And the character, the lead character was called Hunter, so I had 4 people, you know, with a H initial. And I think it's because I'm Hilton, and I think it's just, I don't know if it's in the back of your head, and you just you go to that initial somehow, you know. I don't know.
I go for H as well, and I don't know why I would go for H, but I ended up with Hamlet the cat, Hamilton was a surname, Hannah was a friend. I think there was another H as well, and that was even with my system for avoiding, you know, because it was cat, male cat, female friend, and surname. It sort of managed to get through my system, and then it was a reader pointed out, you've got a lot of H's in your book. Oh my God. It is difficult.
It is.
I did that with a short story once as well, where I think there were 6 people, and all 3 males, their first name started with the same letter, and I hadn't even realised until someone pointed that out. And then I could see it's confusing then when you're reading, you know, for people to actually picture them.
That's right.
Yeah, well, I'm really rubbish at that when I read, so I was very aware of it. I get completely baffled. You know, if you've got a Carol and a Christine in the same book, I can't handle it. So I knew I didn't want to do that.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. I'm going to hit you with a last question. It's flown by, hasn't it? It's because you're so interesting. Yeah. We've got a question on here that says, do readers ever contact you with unusual things that have happened to them, to give you like plot suggestions? Should we start with Roz again?
I get a lot of location suggestions. So because of writing in the Peak District, and I kind of tend to use the creepy locations around here, so I get a lot of people saying, oh, it'd be really, my village is the perfect place to slaughter someone horribly and find their body in a tree or something like that. You know, I get a lot of those kinds of things, or ideas for horrible murders. I haven't had anyone who's contacted me with something kind of really intriguing. That would be actually quite useful. But I can't think of anything, no. So yeah, it's mainly, it's a bit scary how many people are kind of going for nice country walks and seeing beautiful locations, and all they're thinking is, oh, what a great place to find a corpse. That is how I think. But no, I can't think of anything like that.
The kind of comments that I got wasn't so much ideas, because you have to be kind of resistant sometimes. You know, I often get the old guy saying, you should tell my story, lad. I've done a thing or two in my time, but, you know, I'm thinking it would sell to about you know, 3 people, you know. But anyway, that's beside the point. The books have been primarily published have all been set in America, and yet I was a British cop, and I kept getting the question, why don't you write a British cop story? Which kind of prompted me to write the Dark series. And I've set them in my old patch in Cumbria and also in London. So it's got that kind of, you know, 2 opposites, the fells against the urbanisation of London. So I actually did give in and write that on people's suggestion, you know, to write like a cop thriller or a cop procedural. But I wanted my own little gothic bent on it. So, you know, I wrote a supernatural crime story instead. That was well.
I'm always really envious of ex-cops, because that was just one of the worst things about writing my books, was trying to work out all the cop details. So yeah, envy.
You have to make it up in a book, though, you know. So
Yeah,
most of it's not like you read, but then again, you know, no job is when you see it in a book. So there we go.
Jim?
No, not really. Pretty much the only time readers contact me is either to say they like the book or there's something wrong in the book. Especially the time when my main character was having an argument with his teacher, saying that Shakespeare wasn't any good. And someone said they struggled to finish the book because of that. They just couldn't get past it. And, they went on message after message after message to me about how bad that was. And I was trying to, it was a 17-year-old protagonist, English in America, arguing with an English teacher, trying to, you know, kind of be boss, to try and, you know, this and that. And they couldn't get past that at all.
We are not all our characters, are we? People think that everything our characters say is like what we believe. And it's like, no, I don't believe everything. All my characters, some of them are murdering psychopaths, honestly. It's
but if you're having an argument within, when you're writing, you have to look at both sides of the argument anyway.
Yeah.
And so you're having to write from both perspectives. So, but there you go. That was in one of the more interesting ones I've had. It was a lot better than you've spelt this wrong.
I get challenges about the mathematical puzzle that I put in the first one. I get people writing to tell me that I've got that completely wrong, which is quite funny, really. I'm pretty sure I haven't got that completely wrong, but you know.
Everyone's an expert.
Yeah.
You know, especially going back to supernatural crime, it's quite funny that in the supernatural world, if you want to call it that, you've got the open-minded skeptics at this end, and you've got what they call the woo-woos at that end who believe everything. So you can say something to please one side that will go totally against what the others believe. So it's trying to find somewhere in the middle that will, you know, suit both. I wrote a ghost book and I had a complaint that there was too much talk about ghosts in it. So it was like, okay, you know, there we go. So,
you have to laugh at it, really, don't you?
You do. So it's mad. But you just go with it. I usually get attacked by the gun nuts, you know, because I've put the wrong caliber in the wrong hands of the wrong person at the wrong time. So I'm used to it by now.
So we've got 3 minutes left. Shall we just go round in the circle again and just have a quick recap of your books?
Sure.
And things that you write? Starting with Ros.
Well, okay, so I'm sort of the newbie here. I've only written 3, but the first one in the series is The Devil's Dice, which is a good one to start with. Witches and curses and lots of creepy stuff. And then the second one is Dead Man's Daughter, which can be read as a standalone. And that's the one about heart transplants and whether a heart transplant can turn you into a killer. And then the third one, that's the one that's got the creepy child that emerged from the drowned village and tried to kill me. So that one's out recently.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Dark, Inspector Dark. It's first in a planned trilogy, and I was going to go Sesame Street and call it Dark, Darker and Darkest, but you know whether that's what happens or not yet. So book 1 is written, and it is a planned trilogy. Like I said, it's a crime procedural with is it or isn't it a ghost. So I'll leave that up to the reader. The other one I wanted to mention was The Shadow's Call, which is a ghost story with a crime fiction twist, if you want to call it that. So this was all based on events that I witnessed myself in a alleged haunted house. Everything that I explain in the book, or within reason, happened to me, and I'm still scratching my head for answers to some of the phenomena now. So I intertwined it all into a fiction, and people who've read it have quite enjoyed it. So it can't be a bad thing. So they're the ones that probably most likely to mention.
Yeah, so I've got 9 psychological thrillers, which, like I say, they all tend to have twists at the end, and they're all a little bit different, with a dark but with a touch of comedy to them. I've also got a young adult book now, and then I've got my series. Let's see, so this is the Hudson Bell series, Lifetime Ago and Come Back Home. Come Back Home comes out tomorrow. But pushing on to the future, so hopefully on Halloween I will have a horror book out, which is called Little Miss Evil, which I'm writing at the moment, and that's going really well. I'm liking how that is. And then after that, I've got another book called The Crazy Season, which I'm quite excited about. This is something completely different as well, basically about a guy who's an investigative journalist who investigates kind of strange happenings and tries to uncover hoaxes, basically. And he tends to, everything seems to be hoaxes or a hoax until one, and he just cannot explain it at all. And so that's what it's all about. Within that, he'd won an award, but the next day, whilst on holiday, he had a car crash and his wife's in a coma and his child has died. So for a whole year, he's going back and forth to the hospital as well to see his wife. So the idea is there's a bit of a touching kind of relationship between him and his wife. He's also got a relationship with a nurse that's just purely as a friend because he's seeing them every day, along with this weird hoax stuff that's going on. So that should be early next year. I'm thinking January, maybe February time. And then book 3 and probably book 4 of the Hudson Bell series next year as well. So there's a lot coming out, and that's it. Busy times.
Great. And then all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for coming on. It's been a fantastic panel, and it's been a pleasure to have you all.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all the brilliant questions that people have asked. And sorry we didn't manage to answer all of them, did we? Time went so quickly.